Hello. Parashat Tetzaveh ends with a warning that when one brings the ketoret on Mizbeach HaZahav, should be very careful to bring exactly what Hashem commanded and not to bring a ketoret zara, something else. The Torah says, "ובעלות אהרון את הנרות בין הארבעים, יקטירנה קטורת תמיד לפני אדוני לדורותיכם. לא תעלו עליו קטורת זרה." Do not bring a ketoret that is a strange ketoret, ketoret zara, ve'ola u'mincha v'nesach lo tischu alav. That would be a sin. Rashi says, לא תעלו על מזבח זה קטורת זרה, שום קטורת של נדבה, כולן זרות לו חוץ מזו. Although it's nedava, although a person brings it as a nedava, which means it's a gift offering that he puts as a spice, good smell, on the mizbeach hazahav, it's called ketoret zara. And indeed, the Torah tells us in Parashat Shmini that Nadav and Avihu sinned in such a thing that they brought esh zara, asher lo tzivah Hashem. They brought that exactly that the Torah commands not to do. And we need to understand how did they make such a mistake and why the Torah ends in the end of explaining how to build a Bet HaMikdash and what's the building of the Kelim and everything. In the end, the Torah tells us that warning. And the explanation to that is we need to know that when a person came to Bet HaMikdash, he was very much elevated. The Gemara in Baba Batra Kaf Bet says, Ki mitzion tetzeh Torah. When Am Yisrael came to Bet HaMikdash on the Shloshet HaRegalim, they would get a boost of spirituality. They would become much more elevated, and that would last until the next regel. What would have made them so much elevated? Seeing the Kohanim ba'avodatam and the Bet HaMikdash beyofyo, betifarto. What is that? The Torah, in the last couple parashot, explained to us how to build the Bet HaMikdash with a beautiful design. Everything was over there with the most beautiful architects. So when you come into Bet HaMikdash, you get impressed. It has an effect on the heart. When you come into a beautiful place, your heart opens up. You get moved by it. That's also when they see the Kohanim in their beautiful clothing. The clothing of the Kohanim, the Torah goes on and on to explain, ועשית בגדי גודש לאהרון, אחיך לכבוד ולתפארת. The purpose of the clothing, ולכבוד, is order to honor them, לתפארת, to prestige, to have תפארת. That was the purpose of the bgadim of the Kohanim. Not even the Kohen Gadol even more so, but even the regular Kohanim, Kohen Idiot, would have the four begadim. It would be like kavod ul tif'aret, fancy. It's called fancy prestige clothing that would honor them. So therefore, when a Kohen comes to work in Bet HaMikdash, he's very much moved. First of all, the building of the Bet HaMikdash, the beautiful kelim. The Torah speaks about the kelim, that how it was made out of gold, miksha, prachim, everything was over there in the menorah, prachim, kaftorim, everything was made so beautiful. And the wealth, en aniyut b'makom hashirut, says the Gemara, the wealth that was in Bet HaMikdash would make anybody move and come closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, give him a boost till the next time he comes to Bet HaMikdash. And even more so, the Kohanim themselves that work in Bet HaMikdash, that would be constantly serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu, bringing the korbanot. And the one thing that would move one even more so would be the clothing. And therefore, after all that, the Torah commands, be careful, beware. When you wear those clothing, when you come to Bet HaMikdash, when you see how much you are elevated, how much you are moved, don't make a mistake to bring even more than what Hashem commanded. Because that's what happens. When we are very much moved, we can make a mistake of overdoing something. Overdoing something is a sin. The Torah wants us to do exactly. That's what it says here. לא תעלו על מזבח זה קטורת זרה, שום קטורת של נדבה, כולן זרות חוץ מזו. Any קטורת that you would bring would be considered ketoret zara, except what Hashem commanded us. And that's why the command comes all the way in the end. And that's how Nadav and Avihu made that mistake, because it was Chanukat Hamikdash at that time, and they were very, very much moved by it, and they wanted to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu already. They couldn't wait, and they came in and they brought Ketoret Zara, and that was their sin. The Torah tells us how much the clothing affect the person's behavior. The way we dress makes us behave a certain way. One that dress in nice clothing, a suit or whatever he wears that's respectful, would behave very different than if we would wear jeans or shorts or loose clothing. You would act different, you would walk different, you would talk different, and you would do different things. That's the psychology of the clothing on a person. Rabbi Yochanan called his clothing Maneh Machbedotai, which means they would honor him. The clothing would honor him. If you wear honorable clothing, the clothing itself honor you. That's a Gemara in Shabbat Kuf Gimel. And they can do the opposite as well. We see from Adam Rishon and Chava, Vayu shneim arumim ha'adam ve'ishto ve'lo yitposhashu. They didn't wear clothing, and they still didn't have the aspect of busha at that time, of being embarrassed, because Hashem didn't install in them the Tzara. But still, you wear no clothing, you have shorts, you wear loose clothing, you much more come to do a sin, and therefore they fell in that. The Torah gives us an introduction of how they were sinning, what brought them to sin. Obviously, they made mistakes, but the clothing had that effect on them, and that's why the Torah brings that as a very first thing before telling us the whole story of how the Nachash convinced them to sin. And after that, when they realized, they ate from Etz Hadat, they realized, so right away, it says in the Torah that they made chagurot. They understood that they're not wearing clothing, ותפקחנה עיני שניהם וידעו כי ערומים הם ויתפרו עלי תאנה ועשו להם חגורות, which means they made themselves clothing at the time. Beautiful. So why is it that few psukim afterwards it says, ויעש אדוני אלוהים לאדם ולאשתו כותנות אור וילבישם, הקדוש ברוך הוא made for them כותנות, and he made them wear them. Why is that? What's wrong with what they made for themselves? The answer is, says Unkelus, what is kotnot? The same kotnot that we have in Bigdei Kohanim that were lekavod ultifaret. It says in the Unkelus, ועבד אדוני אלוהים לאדם ולתתה לבושין דיקר על משך בשרון ועל בשינון, which means prestige clothing, לבושין דיקר, expensive clothing, clothing that would honor the person. That's the reason he made it for them, because the clothing made them feel loose, made them feel that they can sin, and they fell. But now Kadosh Baruch Hu put them honorable clothing to do the opposite. When a person wears such clothing, he feels much more honorable, respectful, and he would not sin easily. That's why by Nadav Avihu that they died because they brought Esh Zara, it says over there in Rashi that they were burnt, but the clothing, which was the kotnot, were left on them untouched, unburnt. Why? Because the kotnot themselves were those that caused them, just to emphasize this, kotnot themselves has the ability that when you wear fancy clothing, and in some times that you come to work Avodat Hashem, you could be too elevated because of that. You have to know the balance. And when you wear very loose clothing, you could sin. The clothing make a lot of different ways of, has a lot of different effects of the way we behave. And one needs to realize always to wear balanced clothing, as Chazal explained to us, that it can't be clothing that were dirty, that are cheap, that look in a way that disrespect the person. But on the other hand, you don't wear too fancy clothing. You don't wear Shabbat clothing on a weekday. You don't wear wedding clothing on when you go to a regular places. But the person needs to honor himself with the clothing, as Rabbi Yochanan said, that he's calling his clothing those that honor him. And this is what we learn from our parasha, and therefore the Torah commands in the end, be careful after I told you everything about how to build such an elevated Beit HaMikdash that would move a person's heart, that he would feel that I want to do more than needed. I can't wait to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He might come to do mistakes. The Torah says, beware in the end. Don't bring Ketoret Zara. It would not be accepted. Thank you.